Well, welcome to this session of our centenary series, the Centenary of the Baha'i Faith in Australia. It's the July the 4th, 2020, and we have a session tonight on archives. Before I introduce our special speaker, I'd like Arvid to start with a prayer.
O my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavour, and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge, and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you so much, Arvid. So we have online participants from the Pacific, from Fiji, from New Zealand, from around Australia, from the heart of Australia tonight, in Alice Springs, I think, certainly from Northern Territory, from the UK, and maybe elsewhere in the world. I'm looking at all the wonderful faces online, so this is going to be a wonderful session. Thank you for coming online. Now, we've had a number of sessions in which we've looked at the origins of the Australian Baha'i community, some of the early believers, and we've got a series now of 3 sessions which are a bit more about the mechanics of working with archives, working with the wonderful materials online. I don't expect everybody will be interested in those topics, but for those who are interested, well, this is our special time to look at what is the role and purpose of archives and what's happening in Australia. When we finish these 3 sessions, we'll go back to wonderful storytelling, and if you see the series, we're going to go around the Australian states, and each session will look at each of the state in turn to learn a little more detail about the history of our community. And then once we've finished that, we're going to move further afield and look at pioneers and other special stories. So the series will continue. And so thanks for coming along for the journey. Now, Satu Hessar-Amiri was born in Finland, and she came to Australia in 1969. She became a Baha'i in Wollongong in 1987. And she has a bachelor's degree in commerce, and she also has a diploma in applied science and a master's in information science. She and Furazan pioneered in Cook Islands for 2 years and spent a bit of time in the UK before returning to Australia in 2002. And in 2004, she started volunteer work at the National Bahai Office, working in the library with Margaret Anderson, and over a period of time took on more responsibility. And since Margaret's retirement, Satu has been responsible for the archives. I've been privileged to work with her in the last 6 months or so on some projects and got to know her a little and seen the work that she's doing in the archive. And so it was most appropriate that she be invited tonight to tell us all about that work, her thoughts on how to connect with archives and maybe the future of archival work as it relates to our communities, not only in Australia, but we've got people online from overseas. Archives is a global subject. So without further taking time from Satu, I'll welcome her to settle in, take over the screen, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, so I'm a novice at Zooming and putting things up. So I've got my technological support, my husband here to one side. And before I started, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm one member of a very strong National Archives committee, which I'm very happy to see Ahmed Anis is present tonight, and dear Colin Brest, who was a member for many, many years, more than 30 years. And I myself have been a member for, I think, at least 15 years. So when you are a member of the Archives Committee, there's no way you come off unless you really, really become elderly. Even Margaret Anderson, even though she retired, she's still a member and she still participates. And thank God for that, because Margaret really is the repository. Everything is in her head. And I'm just trying to follow in her very big footsteps. So let me get the presentation up. I'll let my technical support do this for me. Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so the archives, rather than trying to teach anybody how to be an archivist, I thought that it would be very good to just explain what our archives actually is and give you some insights, because unless you live in Sydney, it's very unlikely you will ever have had the opportunity to go into the archives. So I have a few slides, and Graham, I will get you to stop recording when we get to the slide about the relics. Okay, sure. So this is when you, Graham in his background actually has the view of the archives opposite to the view that you're seeing here. What you're seeing here is a display of basically information about Mother and Father Dunn. And behind Graham, on Graham's screen, is a sneaky view of a cabinet where we have information about Effie Baker, but also behind the curtains is where we keep some of the very special relics. So my arrows are not moving. Okay, there we go. So what does the National Archives want to do? Well, it wants to preserve the memory of the Baha'i community in Australia by collecting, describing, and conserving for future generations the documents, maps, photographs, ephemera, and audiovisual records relating to the early believers, the embryonic institutions, and the advancement of the faith on this continent. That little picture there is a tiny, tiny photo that was in Father Dunn's wallet. So I just, with all these black and white photos of the past, when you blow them up, you really see beautiful detail. So I'm not actually sure where this photo was taken or how Father Dunn came to own it, but it's such a lovely little thing that he carried with him. So in the archives, we have some relics of the Holy Family. We have letters and cables of the Guardian, Shoghi Effendi, and a lot of work has been done recently to see what else we have that has not yet been published in the book Messages to the Antipodes, because they're hoping to bring a new volume, and we have actually found one or two letters that can be included in the new edition. We have letters, photographs, and items from Henry Hyde and Clara Dunn. We have letters, photographs, and items related to Effie Baker. Mr. Featherston, hand of the cause, Collis Featherston. I sometimes think we should name our new archive building after him, because we have several donations from Mr. Featherston, and he collected many letters. He collected the letters from the Dunns, he collected the letters of Effie Baker, he collected the letters of Ethel Dorr, of many well-known Baha'is, and he brought those to the archives for our safekeeping, as well as a recent donation of a very large quantity of photographs, which the World Centre was very interested in receiving a digital copy of. We also have a collection from the Bolton family, letters and documents of early believers, as I mentioned, photographs from the 1920s, you know, until current times. And we also have records of the National Assembly and its committees, plans and documents relating to the construction of the temple. We often receive boxes of records from local assemblies. And that's a sort of a funny thing. We don't consider those as part of the National Archives. We consider those as records that we're holding on to for safekeeping. We don't, there's a reason for that, which I might touch on later. We have membership records from the very early days, and of course we have publications, newsletters, magazines, brochures, and books. What I might do is I might get you to stop recording, Graham. So we have some wonderful documents in our archives. This is a letter written by Father Dunn as he and Mother Dunn embark upon their journey to Australia. "O thou beloved Abdul Baha." Can you just imagine writing to Abdul Baha? And in return, there is a tablet from Abdul Baha to Henry Hyde and Clara Dunn. I don't have the translation of this one, unfortunately. That we do have these translated, and I just didn't get a chance to take a photo of the English translation. But what wonderful things that we have. We have quite a few items that belong to the hands of the course Clara Dunn and Henry Hyde Dunn. It is quite a job for archivists and historians to transcribe, that means type out some of the letters that are in the archives. You can see here an example from Mother Dunn. She had very large writing, and often to save paper, both sides of the paper were written on, and sometimes even sideways in the margins. And so we have to very carefully study these documents and then try to type what we think Mother Dunn was writing. Shoghi Effendi often did the same. There would be typed letters that would be sent on his behalf to the friends in Australia. And Shoghi Effendi often wrote a comment on the side of the letter or on the back. So it was quite a usual practice for them. They must have got quite good at interpreting it. But for us, who often are not used to reading handwriting anymore, it can be quite a job. Father Dunn's photo wallet and his notebook. What lovely personal items we have been gifted. This is a photo of a very young Mother Dunn, and it was carried by Father Dunn in his wallet, and it's probably only a little bit bigger than a postage stamp. But the quality of black and white photos, I just love them, the way that they can pick up so much detail, even though they're so miniature. And of course, he's got a young Shoghi Effendi and a portrait of Abdul Baha in his photo wallet that he carried with him everywhere. We have a large amount of items from Effie Baker. So here you see Effie Baker as a young woman. And one of the ways that she supported herself was by making toys. So these little wooden toys were made by her. And most people would know Effie, though, through her work, not only because she was the first Australian woman Baha'i, but because she was a photographer at the beginning of, you know, the art of photography, really. And we have a couple of cameras there that belong to Effie, a little box brownie camera and a little accordion type camera that used to close up. Now, these are not the cameras that Effie Baker used when she was sent by The Guardian to Iran in 1929 to 1930 to take photos of the holy places and the Holy Land. What she had to travel with then was one of those cameras with the large glass slides, very fragile. And I think we have only one of those in our archives, and it has not stayed whole. It's been damaged over time. But I've heard there's about 1,000 of those kinds of glass slides at the World Centre. You'll recognise these trees in this photo by Effie, because there's no shrine of the Barb built behind them at this point to share Baji with us too. Okay, so back to Effie Baker. As I was saying, Graham, as some of you may know, is going to be releasing at some time in the future a book about Effie Baker, and was in the archive looking for her albums. Did you find this album, Graham? This small journal with her photos? Anyway, what I've done is I've taken a blow up of some of the photos, because it's incredible to me that these tiny little photos, this is less than an A4 size paper, this album when it's closed. But the detail that these photos can capture. In these photos here, Effie Baker's just showing some of the terrain that she had to travel in Iran with a donkey. They didn't always have cars available. And one of the gentlemen in the photo of 3 gentlemen was the nephew of Baha'u'llah, and he was her interpreter as they went from place to place. And as I was talking earlier about the cameras that Effie had, she would have to develop that film at night. So in these kinds of circumstances, so really it was a heroic journey that she made on behalf of The Guardian. And if you go to the book Nabil's narrative, many of those images are ones that Effie has taken. The other great benefactor to our National Archives is Hand of the Collis Featherstone. And what is remarkable really about the things that Collis has collected and donated to the archives is how meticulously he detailed what he was handing over. And it has made such a big difference for individuals like myself. This is such a sweet photo of Ruhiye Khanum that I just had to share this particular page. And you can also see what I'm sure Collis has taken those photos down the bottom of the inside of the Sydney House of Worship. The other collection that we have is, of course, all about the Sydney House of Worship. So we have construction photos, we have original drawings from the architect, Mr. Brogan, blueprints, samples of materials. It really is quite an interesting collection. And when we had the 50th anniversary of the temple, we had a display really sort of showcasing some of those items that we have. So this is what the archives actually is. Where Graham is sitting is with the background is the central room. And I think most people would be really quite amazed to know how large our archives is. So we have a number of rooms all around the central room. So this is, you can see how we have arranged the archives in special, all documents in folders and the folders in special boxes. This is another room. This is room 1. This is room 2 that I've just called the special store, because in there we also have things like the Treasury Department's records, because they have to hold on to them for 7 years or so. We have an audiovisual room, which is where we put videotapes, cassette tapes, film. And that room we try to keep cold, because that's the optimal condition to store film in. This is in the central room, and it's some of the books that we have, some very early editions of Bahai books. Then we have room 6, which is the library room. So that's where we collect, this cabinet, for example, is a few sets of the Australian Bahai Bulletin that we continue to collect, and then we have bound in volumes. This is the workroom. So we have a room where we're able to process materials and store materials. And of course, there's a couple of computers in there. Then we have this room here at the bottom, which is number 9, is the original records, the original archives. So some of our earliest records are in these boxes. So it's a very large collection, and we are actually filling up. So my husband just pointed out to me, because I have my mouse going all over the screen. They can't see your pointer. Anyway, you get the idea. So when our local assemblies write to us and say, would you like our records? Of course, we're going to say, yes, we will take your records and hold on to them. But we can't do much more than that at this time, because we don't have the room really to process them. So they will sit on our shelves in safe circumstances until such a time that there may be a local archive. And we really hope that we only start getting the local assemblies and local communities records if they really do not have anywhere that they can store them themselves. So, well, how do we look after our records? Well, there are a few principles that we need to apply. We need to keep the environment stable. We have to keep it dark. We try to keep the temperature around 18 to 20 degrees at 50% humidity. Any more than 50% humidity and paper can grow mold. If it's less than 50% humidity, then paper can become quite brittle and dry. So we're always fighting to try to get to that mid-range figure. With film and photos, they should, if possible, be colder and with an even lower amount of humidity, because the last thing you want with film is to have moisture building up on it. And so the things that we're always careful of are dust and mold. We have metal shelving. Because of course we have to do everything that we can to mitigate any possibility of fire damage if there was, for some reason, some kind of fire. We have what's called a VESDA system, which is a very early smoke detection system installed in the archive. So we should get very quick warning if there was any possibility of a fire down there. And another problem is insects. We're pretty well guarded against insects where we are in the basement of the temple. But generally, for people who want to look after their own archives, it's one of those things you really have to think about. So all of our documents are stored in acid-free folders. Printed, things like minutes are printed on acid-free paper, and the boxes are acid-free. We use rigid acid-free board between things so that they don't get compressed, because that is one of the risk factors with documents. If you're not storing them upright, tightly packed, then if you're storing them flat, they can compress and weigh down on each other. And if you've got small documents mixed in with large documents, the small documents will over time make an impression on the large document. One of the risk factors is metal, because metal rusts. So if you want to keep your documents, you have to make sure that you remove anything that is metal. I've got a slide in a moment. I'll talk a bit more about that. Another thing is inks and glues. You don't want to conserve paper documents in any kind of laminated form. If you need to make marks on documents, you do it with pencil, even on the backs of photos, pencil if possible, because inks transfer between mediums and can damage your items. And another thing which is really important in archives, if you're keeping your own archives, is to avoid PVC plastics. These plastics degrade over time and can become quite a sticky mess. And yes, really, you want to avoid having them anywhere near your important documents. So what's vulnerable? These are kinds of things which you might have at home in your own records collections, and you will notice that you may start having to thinking about what you're going to do about them, or if you want to keep them for, to maybe pass on to the archives or to family. I've got an example here of two different kinds of problems with photos of the 70s and 80s. I bet many of you have photos in those photo albums that had the sticky adhesive running in lines and with the plastic flap coming over. If you do, this is from a personal album, my mother-in-law's albums, which my husband has now. We're doing a family digitisation project. And one of our first priorities is to remove any photographs that are stored this way, because the glue can, over time, help break down the photo, disturb the colour, and even sometimes delaminate the photo. On the other side, you'll see, this is actually also from one of the albums of Collis Featherston, is that often there was great variation in the quality of the colour processing, depending on who processed the film. I'm making an assumption when I'm looking at this that it was processed at two different times, or maybe by two different companies, because you can see the colour has really leached out of some of those photos, and yet one of those photos still looks quite fresh. We have a joke with Ahmed about the most holy staples. because one of the things that we always do whenever we're handling documents is we take out anything which is metallic. So this is one afternoon's work for me when I was putting away some documents, which, you know, you can see the damage that the rust causes on the back of that particular document. And it's also really quite tricky to get those staples and pins out without damaging the paper, but they have to come out. Why we make a joke about it is that we revere everything so deeply in the archives that we're frightened maybe we shouldn't throw away even the metal pins. They might have value, which of course they don't, but it's, you know, this is how seriously we take our task. So when you have paper documents,
That's what they do. They have value.
what to you, maybe. So when you have paper, as apart from taking off anything which is metallic, don't store your papers folded, because over time they will tear where the fold is. Don't use sticky tape or lamination, because over time the results of the glues on the paper or photos is irreversible. No one spell checked my presentation. With certain documents, there's ink transference. So the ink from one paper is going to be marking the next document. So you have to really assess your papers and have a look. Do you need to be putting a piece of tissue or a piece of archival paper between each page to preserve it? You want to lay your documents upright because you get compression and warping if they've got something, just from the sheer weight of many documents. You have to watch out for insect damage. Foxing occurs. Now, foxing is when you look at, if you go to a secondhand bookshop or even your own books on your bookshelf that you've had for a number of years, you will see sometimes little red rusty dots all over the paper or inside, and also on like artworks and things like that. That's called foxing. That occurs because of humidity and just sometimes spores. So unfortunately, once you have foxing, there's nothing you can do to remove it. And one of the things that we all know, I think, is not really something which was made with any archives in mind, and that's newspapers and newsprint. That becomes very brittle over time, and it very, very fragile. The older the paper is, the more fragile it is. So it needs to be handled with great care. So what do you have at home that's vulnerable, and what do we have in our archives that is vulnerable? I didn't know if Bruce Thornders was going to be with us this evening, but he had charged me with the task of looking for a particular video for the Vanuatu Islands in the Ocean of Light. And so it was quite an extensive search, and I've only recently found a couple of copies, one of which is as a beta tape. And my goodness, I don't know anybody who's got a machine that would be able to read a beta tape these days. I don't know many people who still have a VHS video machine at home. So these are technologies which are disappearing before our eyes. The equipment to read them is becoming obsolete. The material on the videos themselves degrades over time, the sound degrades, the winding mechanisms inside the tapes cause damage to the edges of the tape and cause warp. So if you have at home very important VHS tapes that you have made, I would suggest making them a priority to have digitized for longevity. CDs and DVDs, it seems that they just came onto the market a few years ago, and yet many of us don't even have CD or DVD readers because everything's on computer or online. They were never meant to be an item which would have a long lifespan. They really only have a lifespan of 5 to 10 years. If you've got information on CDs or DVDs, it's another item that you should really give priority to having digitized. And that's because of the way that they are made. They are a metal between two layers of plastic. The dyes that they use to produce the colors on them deteriorate in light, and the information therefore deteriorates. If there's a scratch, the metal layer underneath the plastic layer oxidizes and causes loss of information as well. So I would say that for all of us at home and in the archives, this is information which is very, which should be a priority. We should make a priority if we want to keep it. So what do we do then, like with VHS and our photos, and if we want to keep them for many, many years? Digitization seems to be the answer. And I can tell you that I get a lot of questions all the time from assemblies mainly. Can we throw out the paper and keep an electronic copy? Well, yes, you can, and maybe sometimes you shouldn't. Sometimes paper is valuable just because of the form that it comes in. For example, a handwritten journal. Digitizing something like that will save the information, but the value of the item is more than just the information. I often use the example of, you could look at a picture of a dinosaur, or you can go into a museum and look at a skeleton of a dinosaur. The experience is very different. So depending on the item, you would want to consider, does the paper object or the object itself have value? Also, for assemblies especially, there's a legal obligation to retain certain kinds of information, especially if they're incorporated. So incorporated assemblies actually need to keep paper for the life of their institution. So you can have all of your business conducted electronically, but at some point in time, you're going to have to also decide what records you need to keep as paper. So how safe is digitization? Well, it depends on what kind of digitization. Because as you have seen in the very short space of 20 years, equipment becomes obsolete very, very quickly. CD players, cassette recorders, DVD players. I mean, everybody goes to Netflix now. Who goes to their Blu-ray player? So you have to think, what do you have that's saved in these formats? And is the equipment that you need to read it going to be around in the short term? So have a plan for migration. When you have information, have a plan of what you're going to do to save it. Are you going to digitize it onto your and save it on a hard drive on your computer? Are you going to put it on the cloud? Are you going to make paper copies of things? They say you should have a backup of your backup. And I've got another spelling check there, problem error there. Backup your backup. So we have information stored on the cloud. We have at the National Archives, we have information stored on external hard drives. And we have, of course, the original material as well. So hopefully we are safeguarding our most important information. When you're thinking about emails and you know, electronic information that you're thinking about archiving, you need to also think that some of the ways that you save that information might not be readable in the future. So I know that recently a question was asked about Outlook emails, just saving an Outlook email. I think it's a .smg or something when you save it. That is a proprietary file format, and in the future, if Microsoft isn't around and there's some other system that you need to read your information, you might not be able to access that information. So what about the cloud? Well, it seems to be a solution. We have a collection of interviews taken of early believers that was that we were able, well, actually it was a project done by the Continental Board of Councillors, and we had Keith Bain from New Zealand conducting interviews with Australian believers, and he produced a large number of tapes. Now we needed to, a few years ago, think about how we were going to back those up so that we could share that information. And it was going to take us many, many hard drives because of the size of the files. So now that we have the opportunity to share things and to save things on the cloud, we can finally start digitizing those from their original format and uploading them then onto the cloud so that they are accessible to everybody. And we have had families come to us and say, oh, my relative was interviewed, we would really like to see that interview, and we really hope to make that possible. So I've got a poster boy, Terry Eichler from Geelong Community. He recently shared with me what their local assembly has done with their records, and what a wonderful example. They have bought these rodent and rigid, they're rodent safe, so you know rats and things can't get into them. Plastic boxes, very rigid, and they have put their records into these binders, and each binder, if you see on the last frame, it has a plastic closing clip. There is no metal at all. So the documents are stored in good quality plastic which doesn't break down. The documents then are put into these binders, so there's no metal, no chance of rust or degradation that way, and then they are stored upright in these boxes. Now I know that one of the issues for local assemblies is space. The assemblies records are in someone's garage or someone's shed, and they don't really want to keep them there forever, especially when they're moving house. So I don't really have an answer, except that assemblies really need to think that they are safeguarding these documents for the future. And there are some communities that I'm aware of doing their histories, writing their histories right now and needing access to documents, and some documents don't exist anymore. Some we have in the archives, but it's important for people to know that there is no backup copy at the National Office. For example, I know of two institutions, one local institution and one regional institution, that both threw away their paper records, believing possibly that there was a copy of their letters and their minutes at National Office, and not all of it is there. So it's very important that local assemblies take their responsibilities for keeping records and archives very seriously. So if you have photographs and you'd like to store them and maybe one day pass them to the archives, we need to know who was in it, when it was taken or where it was taken, and possibly why, for example, if it was a special event. Because without that information, there's no value for future historians. And this is a wonderful example where we see some wonderful names from the past. And it's a beautiful, clear photo, so we can identify them. Miss Greta Lamprell, Mr. James Heggie, Miss Ethel Dorr, Mr. Harold Fitzner, Mrs. Marriott Bolton, Mr. Stanley Bolton, Mrs. Florence Fitzner, and Mrs. Bertha Dobbins. And those are such wonderful early Baha'is. Of course, members of the National Spiritual Assembly, 1948, 1949. So when you have other photos of later periods that are not named, you can go back and say, oh, I think that's Bertha Dobbins. I think that's Bertha Dobbins. It seems very similar. So sometimes it is a little bit of an investigation to try to determine someone's identity. This was a photo. I don't think that my sister-in-law and brother-in-law are here tonight, but I just thought this is a wonderful photo because is that you, a very young Graham Hassel, right in the middle?
Yes.
Yes. I can see my husband as a very young boy at the bottom, and Arvid Yuganagi, is that you next to him? Because I knew you were really good friends when you were about 6 and 7 and 8.
Yes.
That is you? Okay. And so some of the other friends will probably be able to identify different faces in these photos. But myself, I'm very limited in my knowledge. I can see my sister-in-law, Fahime Kingston. There's John Walker right at the back there. I think that's Aflatoon Paymon. Maybe John Davidson, Irene Jones, and I think I've run out of names. So this, oh, and I think there's a Sholeh Forghani in there, but me and my husband are debating which one she is. He should know because he's related to her. But so we have lots of beautiful photos like this, but we're not able to put names to them all. So it's wonderful if there was an enterprise. I think that John Walker will be presenting a session later on name that face, put a name to a person in a photo, and I will be eagerly looking forward to that because it may help me then in the archives identifying people. So what's missing from the archives? I realize I've been talking for a long time. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, so what are you doing now? What activities are you doing now and taking part in? Some of those things are not archival right now, but they will be archival information in the future. So how can you capture it and share it? We need more autobiographies. I mean, I've recently been looking once again at Recollections by Mel Heggie and Sowing the Seeds by Ioli Mann, because for me, because I don't have the context or the history, it really helps me understand how the families are related. I'm always interested to learn. Oh, so that person married that person is related to that person. What's happening in the regions? I mean, a lot of our history is very city-centric and Sydney-centric. What are the stories of the other parts of Australia? You know, we really need to capture those and, you know, send them to the archives, duly detailed. What were we doing in the 80s and 90s? There's not a lot of information captured yet. So I'm hoping people have held on to that information and that will flow into the archives in due course. What are the stories of our Persian friends? So the faith had some real changes, you know, in the last few decades, and our Persian friends made great contributions, and we haven't really captured that in our archives. It's also of value to know their stories of how they came to Australia in the first place. And what about information that's created digitally? I have this beautiful slide here done by, I think it was Sandra Porahmari, a graphic artist. Such a lovely picture of the temple and very topical, talking about COVID-19. So, you know, that's never going to be captured as a paper document or a photograph. So we have to develop strategies on how we're going to capture things as a piece of digital information. So this, I guess I'm just bringing that because you might also be thinking about things that you have at home and how you can share them with us. I think that's the end of my, yeah, that's it. I can stop talking now.
Oh, Satu, thank you. That was tremendous. I think everybody enjoyed it so much. Everybody's learned something from this presentation. People have already started to ask a few questions in the chat column. So let's first of all thank Satu for this presentation. We can also just clap. And we're getting good at this, this part of the session where you remain muted, but you indicate that you want to ask a question. And then she can answer. The floor is open, and I've got one or two things as well. So is that a hand up from Hedy? Is that right? Hedy, go ahead, please. Unmute yourself. Unmute. Thank you.
It was a beautiful presentation. Thank you very much for sharing all that useful information, and very difficult to find it anywhere else. So thank you for that. Two questions came to my mind through this presentation. One was, is there any archived material, whether it's paperwork, written, books, objects, that actually government of Australia is holding in their archive system or in the museums or places like that, or basically they borrowed it from the Baha'i faith as a national archive, something which they delighted to keep it. Is there any items there?
Not really, sort of that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are. the thing is that we have so much history to write still and to research that we haven't even really started tapping into what we have in our archives. And I am sure that there are documents and items in archives and museums around Australia, but I wouldn't be able to say any particular item, but I'm sure future, we know they're safe anyway. If they are in those institutions, they're safe. And generally, most museums and archives are very happy to give access to researchers or writers. So there's never any worry about not being able to see things if we wanted to see things and learn from them.
All right, thank you for that. The other question that came to my mind is there any program or something organized that maybe during this 100th anniversary that we are in it, you are organizing with, say, ABC or SBS or somebody to come and make a documentary about the Baha'is in Australia and can be displayed in the national television?
Well, that sounds like a wonderful individual initiative, and it's not probably something that the archives would take responsibility for. I often explain that the archives is like the library, and then the users come and they use the library, but the library doesn't create the information comes to the library. So it wouldn't really be the role of the archives to do something like that. And we have other agencies like the External Affairs Agency, the people who are conducting, relationships with the media at national office level. They would be the ones who would be promoting those. But I think mostly it would be individual initiative. If somebody, pitched an idea to an organization like a media organization, and was able to follow through, then we would be able to support that maybe with some of the information that we can provide.
That's great. But the reason I asked was because if there was anything on the pipeline, definitely you would be aware of that by now. Thank you very much.
Neil.
Just asking Satu, you aware when you buy a bottle of milk or a plastic bottle of milk, it's got a triangle with a 2 in the middle of it, or a 5 if it's food grade 5. Now, when you talked about PVC, what number is PVC?
I don't know, but I know it's not food grade. So it's very easy you can do an experiment.
Right.
If you have plastic and you want to know whether it's PVC plastic, if you get a copper wire and you heat it and you hold it against the plastic that you think is PVC, if there's a green emanation, a green flame, then you know that it's the bad kind of plastic. And if there's no change, then you know that the plastic's probably okay. So it's quite easy to conduct your own test if you've got boxes or things that you think might not be, or plastic sleeves that you think might not be the right kind of plastic.
So are some A4 plastic sleeves suitable?
Yes, polyethylene, polypropylene, those kinds of plastics are fine. In fact, the very inexpensive Marbig plastic sleeves that you buy in boxes of 100 or 500, they're fine. So we use those to store things. perfectly fine.
Hooray for Marbig.
My son just found that is grade 3 for recycling PVC. And the reason for PVC not being there is because it causes non-seeable fumes that damage the material.
Right.
Thank you to the scientists. That's probably about as far as we need to go into the science of it today.
Yep.
There was one question earlier. Oh, Natalie, are you online here? So Natalie, do you want to speak up and make your comment, please? So Natalie, if you do hear me, you can come online and make the comment. Now, Satu, there was one question earlier about, you mentioned the DVDs and other tapes, and the question was put online by Mezad. Is the archive actually going about the business at the moment of doing the digitization of tapes?
Yes, we are. We've been, you know, it's all about budget, isn't it? So we do have a budget and we have a plan. And so we have been identifying what we think are priorities. And we have been in a process of having them digitized. Now, it has been on hold for about 2 months or 3 months because of COVID. So we're hoping to get back to it soon. But it has the support of the National Assembly and we have a budget. So it's definitely something that we're doing. I think people who are at National Convention, well, a couple of the things that we did digitize the 1982 international conference that was held in Canberra. So some of the friends might have seen a little bit of that. I think it was at National Convention that they showed that. That was one of the first things that we did. But a great priority for us is the interviews of the believers that were interviewed by Keith Bain as part of that project. I think there's about 900 tapes. It's about $30 a tape. So you do the math, 900 tapes times $30. So yeah, it can become a very expensive exercise.
Thanks, Satu. Now, in response to that question about external affairs, Yvonne is with us and she's going to answer that question.
Sorry, before that, can I just add?
No, sorry, Ahmed. No.
Okay.
Later, please.
Thank you, Graham. Yes, so I'm helping the external affairs teams with the work that they're doing towards the centenary. There are plans to do a small documentary for the centenary, but as you can understand, there is this COVID-19 has disrupted everything, and it is quite a difficult task to be able to do that. But, you know, we're certainly working with it. But, there's been a lot of delays and a lot of replanning, rethinking of ideas and to make something possible. So we can't make any particular announcement, but it is definitely part of the plans.
Thanks for that, Yvonne. And Natalie also added, you'll see in the comment that if somebody does have a particular idea for approaching the media, to put that idea to external affairs, and they will see what the possibilities are. Now, there's a couple of other comments online. It's good if you, Satu, do you see the comments? Are you able to see the comments section? Because there's a few questions there, the chat section. There's one from Arvid. How can items of significance be donated to the archive? And Steve Cooney's asked whether you have an electronic catalogue of the archives.
Okay, so items of significance being donated, we would love them. Just contact me. We had some interesting things come in this year. I have to tell you about, well, not this year, last year. Ballarat community had a painting on glass that Effie Baker did well before she was a Baha'i, when she was about maybe, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, something like that. And so that was transported to us all the way from Ballarat. It was very fragile, being glass. And I organised to meet somebody in another part of Sydney to be able to take possession of it for the archives. We get often things sent. I have a book that I received from Andrew Blake. It's just the book that says, it's a picture book of Israel. Then you open the cover and it says, to Mother Dunn. And then later on, somehow it came into the possession of the Featherstones, who presented it to somebody else. And then there is a comment from, see, this is where my knowledge of Baha'i families falls down, because there was someone from the Williams family gifted it on, like re-gifted this book, and it was found in 1997 in a second-hand store in Perth. So it's just amazing how what kinds of things are out there. Second question about do we have an electronic catalogue? We have a program that's called Archive Manager. An Archive Manager is a professional archive program that stores information about the artifact, gives it a number, describes where it's located, describes its condition, provides information about the donors, and that's what we use to find our collections. That being said, sometimes we have a collection that will say, Dunn Papers, Box 1. And that's it. This is just an example. This is not a reality, but for example. And so we don't know actually what's in that box, but we know it's a box of Dunn Papers. And until somebody does some work or some research, we will not find out. But when someone asks a question, then we have to go into that box and we have a look at it. And while we're there, we make sure that very important things are digitized. So it's still a process. There is so much work still to be done in our archives, and many, many wonderful things to discover still.
Thank you, Satu. Well, we've got 4 questions, maybe 5 questions lining up. And so are you able to see the chat there and answer those questions? The first one is there from Mr. Darakshan. Ehsan to Satu, please, would it be possible for an
Okay, so this is a good one. So do we have records that local assemblies can tap into so that they can write their histories? I have one request at the moment to provide documents about a particular assembly. You know, come to the archives and do the research and I will support you and I will point you in the right direction, but I cannot do the research for you in every instance. I principally work for the National Assembly and the archives is one part of my day-to-day work. So any request from the National Assembly will gazump any other request. However, we are very happy to invite people to come to the archives to do research, and we show them how to access the information and how to make sure that when they're touching the information that they're doing it in the right way as well, so that they don't cause any damage. So basically, it's an endeavour that we support, but we cannot do on your behalf in every instance.
Thanks, Satu. Steve, you've got a couple of questions lined up. Can you come online and ask your own questions? That'd be great. Have you got a microphone there? It'd be good if everybody gets to know you. And thanks.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for your presentation. It was awesome, Satu. I'm hoping to come visit sometime. I've been undertaking some research in New Zealand on what I would call proto-Baha'is, so some Baha'i contacts prior to Margaret Stevenson, who was designated the first believer in New Zealand. One of those people wrote to Abdul Baha and received a letter from him, and when Collis Featherston came to New Zealand, he met this chap at a agricultural and pastoral fair, and it's probably documented in Collis Featherston's diary notes of the 70s. Now, I would be very interested to read his diary notes. Do you know if those diaries are accessible to researchers, or what is the situation with those?
So we do not have Collis's diaries. I believe that the family are researching and preparing a book. I probably, those diaries may be available in due course, but at the moment they're not in our hands.
But the family could be contacted for that specific set of dates, I guess, yeah.
I think so. Yeah. So I think one way to do it is you could write to the national office in Australia to me, and I will pass your request on to the family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, and I just haven't. You mentioned about the archive manager, which is great. Is your library the sort of the national reference library, or is it just a library in the archives? Is there a separate library? And does that have its own catalogue? And do you have a want list? Because I'm currently doing that sort of work in New Zealand.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. I started my volunteering work because of my library background in the library of the part of the archives. I haven't done that work for a long time, basically because I just can't get there, but we're still collecting volumes. We have a specific way of cataloguing the books. So if there was something in particular that you wanted to know, we probably have to take that conversation offline. It's a bit probably technical for people. But I can say broadly, the library as a library isn't separate in my mind. To me, it's just rolled out now under the archives, because I can't tell you the last time anyone asked me to refer to something in a book. It's information is available digitally. I'm sad to see the book go. I love books, but unless it's historical information, the book, it's easy. There isn't as much demand to deal with published material as there was in the past. So now the library function kind of falls down under the archives function, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Sure, but I guess my question is, does that have a separate catalogue?
You're not using archive manager. That's a technical question that we can talk on. It's got a specialised created. It's got a what we call it. Paul Gerard in Tasmania developed this thing called the Phoenix schedule, which is, if you know anything about the Dewey Decimal System, and I don't want to bore everybody, but the Dewey Decimal System has a lot of gaps in it to describe religion and technology and whatever. So we developed, he developed and we implemented his catalogue, and so we have a list of books, and some of them which have been catalogued, and so we can help and sort of find things that way. But anyway, it's a conversation we can take offline. I don't think it's going to.
I guess the question is, do you have a searchable digital catalogue? I don't really care how you classify.
No, I don't have a catalogue that I can share with you. Yeah. If you have a particular book that you'd like to find, then I can do that search for you.
Sure. Okay. Interesting. Is that future planned work, or?
Yeah, thank you for that exchange. I should explain that Steve is really one of the premier bibliographers of Baha'i materials anywhere in the world. and it's more an offer of, you know, do you have a want list, other things you want?
Yeah, I probably have some stuff you can.
So you've got to listen there. He's not after books. He's got maybe some rare materials that he can share.
Wow, wonderful.
So look, we've still got a few questions online. Seema, do you want to come online and ask a question? Because it's a good one, and I'm sure there's a good answer for it from Satu.
Yes, just wanted to see if you have any, apart from Holy Families, any archive material which is made of cloth. And if you do, how do you preserve them?
So we have a number, I don't know, Seema, if you remember just out of my head has gone the year that we had the peace flags. So we had flags, material flags designed by children and communities from all over the world, sent to the temple. Viva Rodwell, I think, was one of the principal organisers of that program, and those flags lined the road all the way. It was the International Year of Peace. Lined the road all the way from the temple down to the sea. So we have a lot of those flags. Some of them went to the Powerhouse Museum, I think. How we keep them? Well, we keep them flat. We keep them in a suitcase because they are one of the items that is very nice, but somebody with some time could come to the archives and give us some assistance in preparing them properly for storage. So at the moment they're safe, they're in a stable environment, they're in a dark place, they're kept at a good temperature, they're insect free, but they're not optimally stored. So yes, apart from that, we don't really have any other textile type things in our archives except the things that I described, and they are stored very, very carefully. We have I think you call it an abba, the coat of Abdul Baha. So that is wrapped in many, many layers of tissue paper, and of course you try not to create too many folds in the garment because you want to, wherever there's a fold, you have a potential area of wear, and it's in a special box in a special place.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Satu. Now, Chris and Beta, what are you laughing about? Is there a joke that we need to hear? Okay, I caught you. Friends, we're going to finish soon. So your last question's coming up. Kath, can you come online and ask your good questions? Thanks.
Okay, I hope my sound's okay. Just going to go back up to where they were. So one was about Baha'i books, Satu. Thank you so much also for the presentation. Obviously, there are many people with Baha'i libraries or assemblies with Baha'i libraries with old editions, many old editions of all kinds of things. And I know sometimes those have made their ways, entire libraries, bookshelves have made their way to the World Centre. And there's certain parameters as to what is accepted, and they have to be exceptional to be desired or valuable to acquire. So are there any parameters for what's like first edition of something, or what sort of, obviously that book that you described that has that provenance of signatures of who's owned it is something that's very special. But anything else that, or how do people know what to send, for example?
Okay, so it's always good to check whether we have the book, because we don't have everything. Secondly, hopefully it's in good condition. Thirdly, if it's a first edition of something, it is rare and it's special. So that would be the parameters. If it's yeah, I could not really tell you what we would say no to until I knew what was being offered. And then I would be able to say, oh, we have 2 or 3 copies of that. Thank you very much. We don't need it.
So it's the kind of thing people would proffer or say, this is what we've got, are you interested? Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So we get many, many offers of Herald of the South magazine, of Australian Bahai Bulletin, of World Order. You know, we have sufficient copies, but you know, the very, very early newsletters, some of those we only have as photocopies of Bahai News. So if people somehow had copies of those, they would make our collection complete.
Okay, so I can see there's some senior members of our community online, and some of them are writing things down, so they might be wishes might be granted. The other question I had, if that's okay, Graham, was just question 2 was how can, and again, there may be people online who have some time and interest to be able to assist with the work of the National Archives. And it's, of course, it's specialised work, but there may be projects where individuals could be assisting the committee. So what's the process for people putting their hands up and being able to...
That's what you do, you put your hand up. So I can tell you, I hardly ever turn anyone away.
Yeah.
We're grateful for any help that we receive. There is a learning curve, no doubt about it. I mean, there are some simple things that can be done, like as I explained, you know, with peace flags. And Graham, I think that Chris and Beta were laughing because in the comments it says that they've got some of those flags under their house. Some of those peace banners. You know, you're very welcome to bring them to the National Office, Chris, if they're not mouldy.
On your motorbike.
Yes, well, there were kilometres of it, right? There were kilometres of banners, so there's a lot of banner around. So
I know, that's exactly right. That's exactly
Yes.
right. You know, it's not necessary us also to collect every single one of them, but probably, you know, the most beautiful, the ones that came from the most remote parts of the world, etc. As for serving as a volunteer, you apply to be a volunteer, and then hopefully you make yourself available to come over a period of time. There are occasions where if someone's got 2 weeks every day to offer, that's wonderful.
Could be a included thing.
Yeah, but if somebody was able to come on a regular basis, that would be really beneficial, because there is a learning curve in learning how to handle the materials, in learning how to document things. So, you know, but I can tell you, I have open arms for anybody who wishes to spend some time.
So would it be something that, say a community with 8 to 15 people as a one-off half-day activity, would that be a possible thing, or is that becomes more burden than it is worthwhile to?
Unfortunately, it takes me time then to prepare the work for the people to do. So if there's, you know, 3 people, that's 3 lots of work or project that I have to organise to get done. So it's not really feasible as a one-off. Yeah, sorry.
No, just floating all the options. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. It seems that we've got peace banners sprouting in every state here. We've found some in Tasmania, and we've got some under Chris and Peter's house. So that's one fine for tonight. Friends, we're going to finish very, very soon. I'll just check if there's any final questions before we... Kath, it's got to be a good one.
Graham, can I add something there?
Yes, Ahmed, you can.
In the archives, we have a video digitizing device that a lot of people have at home, and we do in-house VHS digitization. So a lot of people can go use their device that they have at home, recording movies and things like that, connect their VHS tape recorder to it, and digitize their VHS and record it in digital, and then transfer it into a hard disk or something to store it.
You're on mute, Graham.
Sorry, I hit the button, it didn't go. Yes, that's presuming that the cassette is in good condition. I just wanted to mention that I had a conversation with Colin Webber. He couldn't come online for the session, but he said he has professional equipment also. But for example, for the audio cassettes, you know, we used to have audio cassettes and we'd record firesides or other talks at conferences, and Colin has a lot of those himself, and I'm sure others do. So that's another project that we could do to see who has those cassettes lying around in our houses. The time has come for us to get them out, and because they're brittle now, and they might be talks by wonderful early speakers, many by Peter Kahn around Australia and others as well. So maybe this is the time that we think about that as well.
Very serendipitous, because I received late last year a set of tapes of the International Conference in Canberra, 1982, from the Stafford family. And I was thinking about how to go about getting them digitized. So maybe that's something that Colin will be able to help you with.
Oh, that's great, because I think he is happy to. And I think that this session will stimulate some action to assist the archive, which was thanks Mariette, she's got cassettes from her father, Mr. Featherston, and I'm sure others have as well. So that's a subject that we can talk about further. We'll find ways to have more dialogue between us as community members and the archives. Kath, one last thing from you, and then we'll come to a close. Did you finish? You done?
I was just going to ask about if anyone had one of those wonderful temple models. Those of you who've been to the Sydney House of Worship, those models, I think my mum can correct me, they were made by Peter de Vogel, is that correct? Just nod your head, mum. Yep. And so there were, apparently he made 6. Is that correct, mum? Okay, not sure. But many of them have been, there's only one that can be found, so there must be others that are around. So I don't know whether, Satu, that is of something that would be of use, or anyway, if there have been more that have been found.
So the one that you're referring
There's
to is the one that
here. Who said that? Oh, Terry's waving. No, they got that one made. That was, they actually had it made especially. It's separate to the
one. There's one in Geelong which was made by Peter de Vogel, and it's at the Sabetzida's residence. It's been here for many, many years, going back to the probably early 70s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in very, very good condition and very well looked after. But that's at least one.
Thank you, Terry. That is tremendous information. Thank you, Kath, for bringing it up. Thank you, Terry, for that. That's really important.
And
yes, Kath, and then Verna.
Mum's just got a hand up, that's all. Sorry, beg your pardon.
I was just going to say, during the International Year of Peace, when we did all the banners and took them around the House of Worship and down to the ocean, and shortly after that we had a display in some major building in the city, which I can't remember, and we had little mini banners going around it. But the temple model, I was under the impression it was Peter de Vogel's model, but I'm not sure. But I know in 1986 it was definitely around then.
Okay, well, thank you, Verna. Thank you.
Okay, can I say something there? The last word.
Yes, Harry, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to tell you all that I have the virus. I have the virus, so don't panic. Mine is the virus of love. And it'll go around faster than the virus.
I knew there was going to be a punchline if it was Barry.
I give all to you lot. All, so you can carry it on and go to the family everywhere. Yeah, that's it. Allah.
Allah. Thank you, Ferry. So it's a virtual virus. We all caught it. Right.
Yes,
Lovely to hear from you. From Mezad, some questions coming in, friends. Just a few more minutes of your time. Mezad, do you want to come online and ask? I was just asking Mezad if you wanted to come online to ask a question, and I've lost the comments there.
He says that he can't turn the microphone on.
Okay, fine. No, my own comments disappeared. Look, I think we've been online for maybe an hour and 3/4 now. We've learned so much from Satu about the structure of the archive, about the collection, what they want to collect, what they don't need to collect. We've got ideas what we can do individually in our houses, to do with our photographs, our recordings. We have ideas if we are on a local assembly, we can talk to the local assembly and check what records are being held and the quality of that. We can decide if we have time to donate to help the archives, but it must be on a systematic basis rather than a one-off basis. We hope that this conversation tonight will stimulate more discussion of archives at national and local levels. We know that tonight was one part of an ongoing series, and next week there's a change in the time, because next week is a feast night on the Saturday night. So this session will start at 5 p.m, not 7:30 p.m, 5 p.m, and it will be Vicky Majewski. He is an expert with genealogy. She's going to share with us her special findings on some of the first Australian Baha'is. Is a specialist in looking up that information, sharing it with us from where she's situated in Darwin. So this week's going to be 5 o'clock, not 7:30. After that, we'll go back to our 7:30. Yvonne Perkins will be the week after that, and she's looking at how to use a wonderful online resource called Trove. So that's the next 2 weeks. So thank you so much for tonight. Can we all thank Satu as loudly as we can for her presentation tonight. Thank you all for coming. And
Thank you. Thank you, Satu.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you. Beautiful.